Whispers in the gallery. The Westwood Gallery buzzed with the quiet energy of its annual autumn exhibition. Olivia Reed adjusted her glasses and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she wandered through the displays of artwork. Like the other attendees who flocked around colorful paintings, she found herself drawn to a dusty glass case in the corner of the room. Inside lay a violin, its varnish cracked and peeling, strings missing, and scroll chipped a beautiful disaster that most would overlook. But Olivia saw beyond the damage. Her fingers, calloused from years of delicate restoration work, twitched at her sides as she imagined bringing the instrument back to life. "It's rather sad, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Olivia turned to find a man studying the violin with equal interest. He wore a charcoal suit that hung slightly loose on his frame as though he had recently lost weight. His eyes, a striking hazel, seemed familiar in a way she couldn't place. "I think it's just waiting," she replied, "for someone to remember its voice." The man smiled, extending his hand. Julian Mercer, Olivia Reed. Their handshake lingered a moment too long. "Do you play?" Julian asked, nodding toward the violin. "I fix them. I restore string instruments, mostly violins." She pointed to the case. "This one is actually quite special. It's a Guarner, probably mid-1700s. Worth a fortune if properly restored." Julian's eyebrows rose. "You can tell all that just by looking." 15 years of training, your eye will do that," she said with a slight smile. "What brings you to an art exhibition with a broken violin as its least impressive display?" His expression changed, a flicker of confusion passing over his features. "I'm not entirely sure. My therapist suggested I expose myself to art and music, said it might help with my condition." Julian tapped his temple. "Retrograde amnesia. Car accident 2 years ago. I lost about 10 years of memories. Of my 30s. I know I was a composer, but I don't remember writing any of my compositions." Olivia felt her heart stutter. 2 years. The timing aligned perfectly with she pushed the thought away. "That sounds frustrating," she managed. "It is. I know the technical aspects of music, but the emotional connection is gone." Julian turned back to the violin. "Something about this instrument, though. It feels important." The gallery owner, a slender woman named Eleanor, approached them. "I see you found our mystery piece. It was donated anonymously last month." The note only said it needed to find its way home. "How much?" Julian asked suddenly. Eleanor looked surprised. "Not officially for sale, but I'll buy it," he insisted, then glanced at Olivia. "And I'd like to commission you to restore it if you're willing." Olivia should have said no. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. But something in Julian's expression, the lost look of someone searching for their past, resonated with her. "I'd need to examine it properly first," she said, "in my workshop." Julian handed Eleanor his card. "Make the arrangements, whatever the cost." After they exchanged contact information, Julian excused himself to speak with another attendee. Olivia remained by the case, her reflection ghosting over the broken violin. "You don't recognize me at all, do you?" she whispered to Julian's retreating back. Eleanor returned, misinterpreting Olivia's expression. "Quite the coincidence, isn't it? Mr. Mercer was once quite famous in classical circles before his accident. They say he hasn't composed anything since." "No coincidence," Olivia murmured. "That violin belonged to his grandmother. I'd know it anywhere." She didn't add that she had been the one to anonymously donate it to the gallery, hoping that somehow, someday, it would find its way back to him. What Eleanor also didn't know was that Julian Mercer had once written his most celebrated composition. For Olivia, a piece called Autumn Whispers that had brought audiences to tears across Europe. A piece he no longer remembered creating, for a woman he no longer remembered loving. Resonant strings, the soft glow of the workshop lamps, cast long shadows across Olivia's workbench as she carefully removed the violin from its temporary case. 3 days had passed since the gallery exhibition, and after finalizing the paperwork with Eleanor, the instrument had finally arrived at her Studio A converted carriage house behind her Victorian home. Outside, autumn rain pattered against the windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to her work. Olivia slipped on her magnifying headset and began her assessment. Documenting each crack and imperfection with methodical precision, her fingers traced the familiar curves of the instrument, memory and professional expertise blending together. "You've been through quite a journey," she whispered to the violin. She knew its history better than anyone, how it had been passed down through Julian's family for generations. How his grandmother had taught him to play on this very instrument, and how, after her death, he had carried it with him everywhere, till Olivia, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Julian stood in the doorway, raindrops clinging to his coat and hair. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping inside at her gesture. "I wanted to see how you were progressing. I've only just started the assessment," Olivia replied, gesturing. To her notes, "It's in rough shape, but salvageable. The wood is still sound despite the cracks." Julian approached the workbench, his eyes fixed on the violin. "May I?" She nodded, watching as he gently lifted the instrument, holding it with the instinctive care of someone who understood its value. His fingers found the correct position despite his claimed disconnect from his musical past. "It feels ... he began, then stopped, frowning. "Familiar. Somehow." Olivia busied herself with arranging her tools, avoiding his gaze. "Perhaps you played a similar model before your accident?" "Perhaps." He set the violin down with reluctance. "How long will the restoration?" "Take 3 months, minimum. The sound post needs replacing. The bass bar might need reinforcement. And I'll need to carefully source period-appropriate materials for the missing pieces." Julian nodded, then glanced around her workshop. Various instruments in different stages of repair hung from the walls or rested on specialized stands. His attention caught on a framed concert program on the far wall. "Vienna Philharmonic," he read, moving closer to examine it. "Featuring the world premiere of Autumn Whispers by Julian Mercer." His voice faltered. "This was mine?" Olivia froze. She'd forgotten to remove the program, a careless oversight. "Yes," she admitted. "It was quite well received." "Thought you were." "There I attended many classical performances in Vienna." "It's not a lie, but not the whole truth either." Julian turned back to her, his expression troubled. "Why do I feel like we've met before the gallery? Did we know each other before my accident?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Olivia had practiced this moment countless times in her mind, prepared careful half-truths that would protect them both. But facing him now, words failed her. "We crossed paths occasionally," she finally said. In professional settings, before he could press further, she carefully turned the violin over and pointed to a small irregularity in the wood. "Look here, there's something unusual about this seam." Julian followed her redirection, leaning closer. "What is it?" Using a dental pick, Olivia gently worked at the edge, where the backplate met the ribs of the violin. A small compartment revealed, itself a hiding place crafted by a skilled luthier decades ago. "Secret compartments aren't uncommon in valuable instruments," she explained, grateful for the distraction. "People hid valuables, messages, sometimes even political documents during wartime." With tweezers, she extracted a yellowed, folded piece of paper. As she carefully unfolded it, musical notation appeared, handwritten in faded ink. Julian inhaled sharply. "Sheet music." "An original composition, it seems?" Olivia placed it on a clean cloth and stepped back, allowing Julian to examine it. Hands trembled slightly as he reached for the sheet. "This handwriting, it's mine." He studied the notes, humming softly under his breath. "I don't remember writing this, but I can hear it right here." He tapped his temple, like an echo. "What's it called?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. Julian squinted at the top of the page where a title was written in the same elegant script. "Olivia's Lullaby," he read aloud, then looked up at her with sudden intensity. "It's named after you." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken history. Olivia had hidden the composition in the violin herself. Before donating it to the gallery, a piece Julian had written for her on their last night together in Vienna, before everything fell apart. "Perhaps it's just a coincidence," she suggested. "Weakly, Olivia is a common name. But Julian was already moving toward the small upright piano in the corner of her workshop. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before pressing down, tentatively at first. Then, with growing confidence as the melody emerged a hauntingly, beautiful progression that filled the small space, recognition flashed across his face. As he played, muscle memory guiding his hands through the piece he'd composed but couldn't remember. The music wrapped around them both, bridging past and present. "I wrote this for someone I loved," he said quietly, still playing. "I'm certain of it." Olivia turned away, blinking rapidly to clear the moisture from her eyes. "The violin will be ready in 3 months," she said, her voice professional once more. "I'll call you when I have an update." Julian stopped playing, the last note hanging in the air between them. "You know more than you're telling me, don't you, Olivia?" She met his gaze steadily. "We all have pasts we'd rather not revisit, Mr. Mercer. Sometimes forgotten melodies are best left unplayed." He gathered his coat, pausing at the door. "My doctor says recovered memories can't be forced. They return when something triggers them. I think you might be that trigger." With that, he disappeared into the rain, leaving Olivia alone with the broken violin and the music that had once bound them together. Dissonant memories. November gave way to December, and snow began to dust the streets of the city. Olivia's workshop became her sanctuary as she devoted herself to restoring Julian's violin. Each day brought new progress, carefully mending cracks. With hide glue, crafting a new bridge from aged maple, repairing the damaged scroll with painstaking precision.
All the work required complete concentration,
which helped keep her thoughts away from its owner. But Julian Mercer was not easily forgotten. He called weekly for updates, each conversation carefully professional, yet underlaid with tension. He never mentioned Olivia's lullaby again, but the unspoken questions lingered between them. On a particularly cold Thursday afternoon, as Olivia was fitting new strings to the nearly restored violin, her workshop door opened without a knock. Julian stood there, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, his expression troubled. "I remembered something," he said without preamble. Olivia set down her tools, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. "Oh, a hotel room in Vienna, floored 2-ceiling windows overlooking the opera house. You were there, wearing a blue dress." His eyes searched hers. "It wasn't a professional meeting, was it?" She turned away, busying herself with adjusting the fine-tuners on the violin. "Should have called before coming." 5 years ago," Julian continued, ignoring her deflection, "we spent 3 weeks together in Vienna while I prepared for the premiere of Autumn Whispers. We walked along the Danube. You wore a silver bracelet with tiny violins that jingled when you moved." He stepped closer. "Am I wrong?" Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "No," she admitted. "You're not wrong. Why didn't you tell me?" "When we met at the gallery, when I told you about my amnesia, why pretend we were strangers?" "'Cause we are strangers now," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. "The man I knew in Vienna doesn't exist anymore. Your memories of us are fragments without context." Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Then give me context. Help me understand what happened between us." Olivia sighed, setting the violin in its case. She moved to the small kitchenette in the corner of her workshop and put on a kettle. Some conversations required tea. "We met at a luthiers' conference in Prague," she began, measuring loose tea into a pot. "You were researching violin construction for a composition?" "I was presenting on restoration techniques. We were both far from home, both passionate about music. One thing led to another. We fell in love," Julian said. "It wasn't a question." "He had an affair," Olivia corrected, the word sharp and clinical. 3 months of hotel rooms and concert halls across Europe. Vienna was the end of it. The kettle whistled. She poured steaming water over the tea leaves, the familiar ritual buying her time to compose herself. Why did it end? Quietly, Olivia handed him a mug of tea. Your career was taking off. Autumn Whispers was being celebrated as a masterpiece. There were offers from orchestras around the world. She took a careful sip, the hot liquid burning her tongue. And there was Charlotte. Julian stilled. Charlotte? Your fiancée, Olivia watched recognition dawn on his face. You remember her? Bits and pieces, he admitted. Blonde hair, A ring with 3 diamonds? We met at Juilliard. She came too. Vienna for the premiere? Olivia continued. I didn't know about her until I saw you together at the reception. You introduced me as a colleague in the industry. The memory still stung. Even after all this time, Julian set down his untouched tea. I was engaged while involved with you. It's not the kind of man I thought I was. People are complicated, Olivia replied. You were torn between stability and passion. In the end, you chose stability in Charlotte. What happened with her after my accident? She stayed for a year through your initial recovery. When it became clear your memory might never fully return, she left. Olivia didn't add that she had followed Julian's recovery from afar, reading medical updates Charlotte had posted on social media, waiting for the right moment to re-enter his life. Julian paced the length of the workshop. So I lost both of you. You didn't lose me, Olivia, said softly. You let me go? She gestured to the violin case. That instrument was a parting gift from me. You left it backstage after the Vienna premiere with a note saying you couldn't keep it, said it reminded you too much of choices you couldn't make. Understanding dawned on Julian's face, and you kept it all these years. Then donated it to the gallery where I happened to be visiting. It wasn't chance, Olivia admitted. I read about your therapy in a music magazine profile. The article mentioned you'd be attending the Westwood exhibition as part of your recovery. I thought perhaps seeing the violin might trigger something. A calculated reunion, Julian said, his tone unreadable. Foolish hope, Olivia corrected. I should have left the past buried. Julian approached the violin case, opening it to reveal the now gleaming instrument. May I? He asked, and at her nod, he lifted it carefully, tucking it under his chin with practiced ease. It's not quite ready, Olivia warned. The strings need time to settle, and I haven't adjusted the sound post perfectly yet. But Julian was all ready, drawing the bow across the strings, coaxing forth a single pure note that hung in the air between them. He closed his eyes, playing a few hesitant measures before launching into Olivia's lullaby. The melody filled the workshop, more complex than the piano rendition. In the violin's voice, it became both a lament and a celebration, the story of their brief time together translated into music. Olivia watched his face as he played, seeing the moment when memory fully returned, his expression shifting from concentration to pain to understanding. When the final note faded, Julian lowered the violin slowly. I remember everything now, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Vienna, the choices I made, why I walked away. He carefully returned the violin to its case. I remember loving you, Olivia. I remember breaking your heart. That was a long time ago, she said, though. They both knew the wounds were still fresh. Julian moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. The violin sounds perfect. You've done remarkable work, he hesitated. I'm playing at the Winter Concert Series next month, my first public performance since the accident. I'd like you to be there. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving. Only the lingering echo of the melody he'd written for her 5 years ago, a melody that now carried the weight of everything they'd lost and found again. Crescendo of truth, the Winter Concert Series transformed the old Franklin Theater into a wonderland of twinkling lights and evergreen garlands. Olivia stood in the lobby, clutching her program with gloved hands, debating whether to find her seat or flee back into the snowy night. Her reflection in the ornate mirrors showed a woman she barely recognized, hair swept up elegantly, wearing a midnight blue gown that fell to her ankles. It had been 3 weeks since Julian had played Olivia's lullaby in her workshop, 3 weeks of silence between them as she completed the final adjustments to his violin. She'd delivered it to his apartment yesterday, leaving it with his doorman to avoid another confrontation. Now, as concertgoers streamed past her into the auditorium, she wondered if coming had been a mistake. Miss Reed? A young woman in the theater's uniform approached. Mr. Mercer asked that you be shown to a reserved seat. Surprised, Olivia followed her down the center aisle to the 4th row. A small card marked reserved sat on a seat directly in the center, offering a perfect view of the stage where a single chair and music stand waited under the spotlight. The theater filled quickly, excited whispers rippling through the audience. Julian Mercer's return to performing was the highlight of the concert. Sirius's first public appearance since the accident that had stolen his memory. Music critics, former colleagues, and devoted fans had all come to witness whether his talent had survived along with his body. The house lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as Julian walked onto the stage. He wore a simple black suit, the restored Guarneri violin in his hand gleaming under the lights. He seemed calm as he surveyed the audience, until his gaze found Olivia. A flicker of something relief perhaps crossed his face before he addressed. "The crowd, thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "Many of you know, 2 years ago, I lost a significant portion of my memory. Along with personal recollections, I lost my connection to music, the emotional core that had always guided my compositions." He adjusted the music stand, though Olivia noticed it held no sheet music. "Recently, I've begun to recover some of those memories, thanks to this violin and the person who restored it." Murmurs spread through the audience. This was not the program they had expected. Tonight I'd planned to play Bach's Chaconne in D minor, a piece I've known since childhood. But instead, I'd like to perform something I wrote 5 years ago, and only recently remembered. His eyes found Olivia again. "It's called Autumn Whispers, and it tells the story of a love that changed everything." Olivia's breath caught. Autumn Whispers had been his most acclaimed composition. But it wasn't a solo violin piece. It had been written for full orchestra. As Julian raised the violin to his chin, she wondered how he would translate such a complex work. The first notes floated through the theater, gentle, questioning phrases that gradually built in intensity. Olivia recognized the main theme, but this version was different, more intimate. Julian played with his eyes closed, swaying slightly as the music flowed through him. Without an orchestra behind him, each note stood exposed, vulnerable in its simplicity. As she listened, Olivia realized he wasn't simply performing the piece, he was reinterpreting it, stripping away the layers to reveal its emotional core. And with stunning clarity, she understood what she'd never known before. Autumn Whispers had been about her all along. The melody shifted into a passage she remembered from the original composition. A tumultuous section filled with conflict and tension. On the violin alone, it became a lament, the sound of someone torn between desire and duty. Julian's body tensed with the effort of drawing forth each painful note. His face revealing the memories the music evoked, tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks as the piece moved toward its conclusion. In the orchestral version, it had ended triumphantly, with soaring strings and resounding brass. But in Julian's solo rendition, it transformed into something quieter. A gentle resolution that neither celebrated nor mourned, but simply acknowledged what had been and what might yet be. The final note hung in the air for a breathless moment before the theater erupted in applause. Julian opened his eyes, looking dazed as he lowered the violin. The audience rose to their feet, their ovation thunderous, but Julian seemed to hear none of it. His gaze remained fixed on Olivia. She wanted to look away, to shield herself from the raw emotion in his eyes, but found she couldn't. 5 years of buried feelings surged to the surface as they stared at each other across the crowded theater. Julian took a bow, then raised his hand for silence. "There's one more piece I'd like to play tonight," he said when the applause finally subsided. "Something no one has heard before, except the person it was written for." He looked directly at Olivia. "It's called the second movement because sometimes in music, as in life, we need to revisit themes we thought were finished." Without waiting for a reaction, he began to play a new composition. The melody contained echoes of Olivia's lullaby, but transformed where the lullaby had been tender and bittersweet. This piece burned with hope and possibility. It asked questions in each phrase, building toward an unresolved cadence that seemed to hang in the air like an outstretched hand. When he finished, the silence in the theater was absolute. Then slowly the applause began again, building to another standing ovation. Julian bowed once more and exited the stage quickly, leaving the audience calling for an encore that wouldn't come. Olivia sat frozen in her seat as people filed out around her, discussing the unexpected and moving performance. She couldn't move, couldn't process the message Julian had just sent her through his music. A message meant for her alone in a theater full of strangers. Ms. Reed? The same young staff member appeared at her side. Mr. Mercer would like to see you backstage, if you're willing. Olivia nodded, following her through a side door and down a narrow hallway to a small dressing room. Julian stood by the window, still holding the violin, looking both exhausted and exhilarated.
Are you okay?
He said simply, when they were alone. You played beautifully, she replied, keeping her distance. The violin sounds even better than I hoped. It's not the violin, Olivia. It's what it helped me remember. He set the instrument carefully in its case. When I played Autumn Whispers just now, I remembered why I originally wrote it. It wasn't about Charlotte or my career or anything. Else it was about a sand, the impossible choice I thought I had to make. You did make that choice, Olivia reminded him. You chose Charlotte and your career. I chose wrong. Julian took a step toward her. That night in Vienna, after you saw me with Charlotte, you came to my hotel room. You asked me to leave with you, to start over somewhere new. Olivia swallowed hard. You said you couldn't throw away everything you'd worked for, that we'd been living in a fantasy. I was a coward, Julian admitted. I had everything planned out with Charlotte, the respectable marriage, the prestigious career, the life everyone expected of me. You asked me to choose passion over security, and I wasn't brave enough. And now, Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I've had 2 years of living half a life, with no memory of why I made the choices I did. And in these past few weeks, as those memories returned, I realized something. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. The only time I felt truly alive, truly myself, was with you in Prague. In Vienna, and now, in your workshop with that violin between us. Julian, I'm not asking for forgiveness, he interrupted. Or for us to pretend the past didn't happen. But that piece I just played, the second movement, it's an invitation. A question. What question? Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. Julian took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. If two people find each other again after losing everything, isn't that worth exploring? Couldn't that be the beginning of a new composition? Outside the dressing room, they could hear the theater emptying, the muffled sounds of the world continuing. Without them, but inside, time seemed suspended, as Olivia stood at the crossroads of past and future, facing the man who had once broken her heart and was now offering to help mend it. I don't know if I can trust this, she said honestly. Do I know your memory won't change everything again? Julian's expression softened. Because this time, I'm choosing with my eyes open. No expectations, no predetermined path. Just us, seeing where the music takes us. Lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so achingly familiar that Olivia felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. I'll need time, she whispered. We have that now, Julian replied. All the time we need to get this right. From its case, the restored violin gleamed in the dressing room light, a silent witness to their broken past and uncertain future. Like them, it had been damaged, carefully mended, and now waited to discover what new music it might create. Harmonious Futures January painted the city in shades of gray and white, the world muffled beneath layers of snow. In Olivia's workshop, however, color and sound flourished. New instruments lined the walls, a cello with richly stained wood, viola awaiting its final coat of varnish, a quartet of violins in various stages of completion. Business had flourished since Julian's concert, with musicians from across the country seeking out the woman who had restored Julian Mercer's Guarneri to such spectacular voice. Olivia worked with renewed focus, her hands steady as she applied delicate inlay to a violin bridge. The bell above her door chimed softly, announcing a visitor. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. You're early, she said, setting aside her tools. Julian shook snow from his coat, hanging it on the rack by the door. Rehearsal ended sooner than expected. Conductor actually liked my revisions for once. In the 6 weeks since the winter concert, they had established a cautious routine. Julian would visit her workshop every Thursday afternoon, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes sheet music, always careful not to push too quickly. They were rebuilding trust one conversation at a time, rediscovering each other in this new reality they shared. "How's the symphony coming along?" Olivia asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Nearly finished. The Boston Philharmonic wants to premiere it in the spring." Julian moved around the workshop, examining her current projects with appreciation. "They're calling it my triumphant return." "Is that how it feels to you? Triumphant?" Julian considered the question as he warmed his hands by the small wood stove. "It feels authentic. For the first time since the accident. I'm writing music that's truly mine, not trying to recapture what I was before." Olivia nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She, too, had transformed her work since their reunion, taking more creative risks with her restorations, infusing traditional techniques with subtle innovations. They were both evolving, finding new artistic voices shaped by their shared past, but not defined by it. "I have something for you," Julian said, reaching into his messenger bag. He withdrew a leather portfolio and placed it on her workbench. "Complete score for the second movement. I finished it last night." Olivia carefully opened the portfolio. Inside lay sheet music, the notes written in Julian's distinctive hand. Each page a testament to hours of careful composition. The title page bore a dedication. For Olivia, the melody that found its way home. "It's beautiful," she said, touched by the gesture. "There's more." Julian reached into his bag again and produced a small wooden box, aged and polished to a soft glow. "This arrived from Vienna yesterday. I asked some former colleagues to search the Opera House archives." Curious Olivia opened the box. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a silver bracelet with tiny violin charms, the one she had worn during their time in Vienna, the one she had left behind in his hotel room the night they parted. "How did you?" she began, her voice catching. "Was in the lost and found for months, apparently. Then someone recognized it as the bracelet you always wore and stored it with my personal effects from the premiere." Julian didn't reach for it, letting her decide what to do with this tangible piece of their history. "I thought you might want it back." Olivia lifted the bracelet, the tiny violins tinkling just as she remembered. "I never thought I'd see this again. Neither of us expected to revisit the past," Julian said quietly. "Yet here we are." The bracelet caught the afternoon light, casting small prisms across the workshop walls. Olivia hesitated, then held it out to Julian. "Ow. Would you?" she asked, extending her wrist. With careful fingers, he fastened the clasp, the simple act carrying the weight of everything they'd experienced together. His hand lingered on her wrist, thumb brushing over her pulse point. "I've been patient," he said, his voice low. "I promised you time, and I've tried to give it. But I need to ask Olivia, where do we stand?" She had asked herself the same question countless times over the past weeks. The logical part of Hertha, part that remembered the pain of their parting in Vienna, counseled caution. But another part, the part that responded to the music he created, that recognized the man he had become since his accident, pulled her toward him with undeniable force. "I'm not the same woman you knew in Vienna," she said carefully. "Those years changed me. I built a life without you, learned to protect myself." "I understand if it's too late," Julian began, but Olivia shook her head. "That's not what I'm saying." She touched the bracelet, the familiar weight anchoring her to the present moment. "What I mean is, if we try again, it won't be a continuation of what we had before. It would be something new, something we'd build together with open eyes." Hope bloomed across Julian's features. "That's all I want, a chance to write a new composition with you, one note at a time." "Oh." Olivia smiled at the musical metaphor. "You composers and your romantic notions. Is it working?" he asked, returning her smile. Instead of answering, Olivia crossed to the piano in the corner of her workshop. She sat on the bench and began to play Olivia's lullaby, her interpretation more halting than his, but filled with feeling. Julian watched, surprised. She had never mentioned knowing how to play. "I taught myself after Vienna," she explained, continuing to play. "I wanted to understand the piece you'd written for me, to translate it through my own hands." Julian moved to sit beside her on the bench, their shoulders touching. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded, his hands joined hers on the keys, adding, depth and complexity to the simple melody. Together, they transformed the lullaby into a duet, each responding to the other's musical choices, creating something neither could have played alone. When the final notes faded, they remained side by side, the silence between them comfortable and full of possibility. "I'd like to try," Olivia said finally, not picking up where we left off, but starting something new, something real. Julian's expression softened with relief and tenderness. "I'd like that too." He leaned forward, his intention clear, and Olivia met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with the recognition of all they had lost and found again. When they pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Where do we begin?" He asked. Olivia glanced at the score he had brought her, the second movement waiting to be played. "We begin with music," she said. "Always with music." The next evening they sat together in Julian's apartment, the restored Guarneri violin balanced on his knee as he played through the completed second movement for the first time. Olivia watched his face as he performed, seeing the man she had first loved in Vienna and the new man he had become since losing his memory. Both versions now integrated into a whole that was wiser, more vulnerable, and infinitely more compelling. As Julian drew the final notes from the violin, a gentle snow began to fall outside his windows, coating the city in fresh possibility. They had survived the dissonance of separation, the jarring shock of rediscovery. Now they faced the challenging, beautiful work of composing a life together, not despite their complicated past, but enriched by it. Julian set aside the violin and took Olivia's hand, the silver bracelet chiming softly as their fingers intertwined. Outside, the world continued its rhythmic pace. Inside, in the quiet space they had created, a new melody was just beginning, one composed of memory and hope, played by two people who had found their way back to harmony. "What happens next?" Olivia asked. "Not just about the evening, but about all the days stretching before them." Julian smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "That's the beauty of it," he said. "We improvise." Olivia could already hear the music they would make together, sometimes achingly beautiful, sometimes challenging and complex, but always, always true. The echo of forgotten melodies had led them here, but the symphony of their future remained unwritten, waiting for them to discover each note. Measure by measure, day by day, and as snow continued to fall, coating the world in pristine white, they began to compose the first measures of that new symphony to artists who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes after the deepest silence, and that love, like a carefully restored violin, could emerge from brokenness with a voice more resonant than before.